Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us here for this session. I'm Goldie Blumenstick. I'm a senior writer at the Chronicle of Higher Education. Your program gives you a very good description of what the problems that we face today, so I won't take a lot of time to set the stage. I did want to put up one slide that I find, it's slide number, slide number 22, I think, sorry. God, I thought I was all organized here. Pardon me about that. That sort of illustrates to me what some of the most pressing challenges that we face right now in this issue as we talk about higher education. Frankly, I find it, when I was doing my book on the crisis in higher education, I found it one of the most compelling and disturbing statistics around. In America today, a wealthy person is nearly 9 times as likely than a poor person to have earned their BA by age 24. And as this chart shows, that gap has gotten worse over the last 40 years. By the way, I should say that the second most compelling statistic I found when I was doing the book was the data that looked at the way the incomes have stagnated over the last 20 years compared to the way college costs have been rising. And I think that's probably a topic we're going to need to talk about a little bit today, because it certainly plays into a lot of the issues about college affordability for everybody, and particularly college affordability for low-income students. Obviously, there are a lot of factors that play into these disparities in degree attainment that we see in our country. If you look right now at the demographics of colleges, what you would see is a lot of stratification by socioeconomic status and by proxy, by race. Richer and wealthier kids are at, and not just kids, but adults, are at more elite institutions. Lower income students are at community colleges and for-profit colleges. And that really affects, in many cases, the education that they're getting. And we also know that there are a lot fewer advising resources for students in the K-12 sector. They don't have what's known as the college knowledge. They don't really have the experience to go to college and to understand how to get into college. Luckily for us, though, we have on our panel today, we have some people with expertise and experience that can offer us a really great and diverse lens to talk about these issues a little bit. So I'm going to dive right in a little bit on this discussion, and let's get right to it. Decided to sort of go in chronological order, starting with the young people and sort of working our way up into college. So to my left, George Weiss, the founder of Say Yes to Education. George, one of the things that's struck me is I'm always sort of surprised by this, even when I find sort of knowledgeable people who look at the college problem and they kind of think problem solved. You know, we have so many resources today for young people. You know, there's scholarships available. And if you're a low-income, smart student, you're going to get to go to college, and your path is just made for you because of what we have set up with financial aid from the federal government and what schools do. But I'm imagining when you started Say Yes, that's not what you found at all.
Not at all. I don't even find that today.
No. So what sort of compelled you to start Say Yes to Education, and tell us a little bit about and frankly, a little bit about what you've learned along the way.
That's what kind of time do I have here? It's a long one. Just briefly, let me tell you how Say Yes started. I was a sophomore at Penn, and I was very poor. And they asked us to host a Christmas party for a group of inner city kids. And they were of Italian and Irish descent, and they were named the 12 Apostles, their gang. And I befriended these kids. I was 19, they were 12. And when I graduated Penn, I'd see them once a year. But then suddenly in my mid-20s, I was able to take these kids to lunch. And you usually get a pretty good turnout when you offer a free meal. And we had talked over the years about their sisters getting pregnant, their siblings in jail, but we never talked about staying in school. All 12 of these kids graduated high school. When I heard that at lunch, I got very emotional. One of the kids turns to me and says, "George, we couldn't look you in the eye if we dropped out." So I just made a pact with God then and there. If I ever had the financial wherewithal, I would do something about education.
So what is it that makes a difference, you think, along the way? In your program, what do you do that makes the difference?
It's like any businessman when you look at it. And we started in 1987. The model has kept evolving, okay? And one of the first lessons we learned is we had to start younger and younger and younger. Now the model has evolved where we take over entire cities. It's a very holistic approach. And when you look at, and I've done a lot of panel discussions, when you look at all these federal governments and all these programs, and as Lowell, mentioned at lunch, been very ineffective over the years. And so what we basically do is add a lot of support systems like we would do for our own kids to give them a much better opportunity to succeed. So the first thing we do is we offer free legal aid to any family that has a kid in the public school systems. We meet with the unions, we have them change their contract. We sit down with the politicians and say, frankly, we don't want any political bullshit. We're here to help your kids, and if you can't come together, then you're not going to be one of our future cities. Mental health issues, 24.8% of inner city kids, from the worst part of the inner city kids, have mental health issues. So we put a mental health clinic in every school. We put health clinics dispersed around the city. We put in something like a student monitoring system, which is so basic that most inner cities don't have because they don't want to track how poorly they're doing. So we do the after-school programs, et cetera, changing the curriculum. But one key thing is SAYS is about hope. It's about leveling the playing field. And when kids become, because we take over everybody in the city, pre-K through 12.
So you come into a city, you take on the system, the school. You work directly with the school system.
That's correct. And but at the end of the sophomore year, which you would do for your own kids, you start having them explore different opportunities. Southwest Airlines flies our kids to different college interviews, and we help them with the application process. But we partner with 70 private colleges that offer our kids free tuition. So there's really something that really increases their horizons. It gives them hope. And the choices they have, they can go to any Ivy League school that they can get into. They can 3 schools on the West Coast, Stanford, USC, and Pomona, but you got Notre Dame, Vanderbilt, Rice University, some really great schools. So and once you start breaking the gridlock and seeing one kid, like one of my kids last year went to Harvard. I'm a Penn guy, and I try to talk the kid out of it unsuccessfully. And people that know me know that I tried pretty hard in that area. But once that sends that message out, hey, look, you can succeed. Okay, it really inspires other kids in the community. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and I'm very struck by the mental health issues and the legal issues. I think that holistic support system is probably maybe even surprising to some people here. Seth, as we were walking over, I said I wanted to take note of the fact that we were here discussing the graduation gap at the Beverly Hilton in Beverly Hills, California. And I wondered if that was an appropriate comment to make. You told me to go for it, so I'm going for it. We're discussing that here at the Beverly Hilton. But obviously, you come at this from a different perspective. You were not raised with a silver spoon or any kind of a spoon that may be in your mouth. So can you just tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and how it relates to how you grew up?
Yeah, I grew up in Harlem till I was 8 years old, and then Newburgh, New York. Was arrested several times for selling drugs. Was stabbed. Had a very tough childhood. Was the environment that I grew up in, and was very fortunate to meet wonderful people who have taken me more through mentorship. It wasn't through education. I had a very poor education, never had over a 70. The only reason I got over 70 was the last year of my high school was to play football in college at University of Connecticut.
But you got into University of Connecticut.
I did for football, not for education. And quit after 2 years because my father passed away. And like I said, I had wonderful mentors in my life to start 3 companies, and I've been very fortunate in life. And now I want to give back. And my wife and I have been giving back to abused children for the last 9 years, excuse me, Kids House in Florida. And I woke up a year ago, called Mike and said, Mike, I want to do something that hits my own home. I was never abused, maybe on a football field, but not by my parents. And I wanted to give back to children because there was never any support when I grew up. There was never anybody there to give me, when I came home from school, like my kids when they come home, there was never anybody there to say, have you eaten lunch? Are you hungry? Did you do your homework? Can I help you with your homework? And not that there wasn't, my parents wouldn't want to. They weren't there and didn't have the ability to do so. So we're very focused on, with our schools, instead of, I want to grow up to be George. I want to take over cities. Right now we're trying to take over schools one by one. But our goal is we have 3 schools, starting with the first one. What we did is go in and say from 6 in the morning till 6 at night. So you come into school at 6 in the morning, you change into your uniform, you shower, change into your uniform, so you're dressed just like business, right? When we get in the morning, you put on a suit and tie or whatever, you put on something nice.
Except here in LA, I heard you don't do that.
I heard they don't work. That's why they don't work as hard as we do in New York. So you put a suit and tie. It's a uniform. You put on a uniform to go play football, to go be ready to go play a sport and perform. And so these kids, it's all about performance and being ready to perform and being prepared to perform. So they come in, get breakfast, shower, uniforms, go to school, and then after school, these kids have after-school mentoring programs, tutoring, after-school activities, not just football and things that they've been taught in their neighborhood that's the only way to get out of school, things that are all around bridging a gap, like learning how to code, learning how to build video games instead of play video games. So although education and college education is very important, I don't believe you need a college education to be productive. And you'll hear me say this a lot today. I'm not looking to get, if these kids go on to Harvard and Penn, that'd be wonderful. However, I'm just looking to go unproductive to productive. Teaching them life skills, teaching them what a bank account is, saving a bank account, what does compounding interest mean, what is things that they need to learn to be able to sustain their own families, teaching them about being good kids, teaching them about being good parents, what is the results happen when you're a single parent, what follows that. And I'll end with, it also economically, why it resonates with a lot of people in this room, as we talked about on the way over, is the amount of income. So you look at the amount of our federal government, how much we spend. We're spending $43,000 per person. That's on, let's call them unproductive, whether you want to call them underprivileged, unproductive. You spend $7,000 to $9,000 in bridging the gap in our schools. So we take on a school that's underperforming, and we bridge the gap at $7,000 to $9,000 per student from 7 to 17. Versus if they're not productive from 17, 18, and these are hard costs, not soft costs, hard costs from 17, 18 until 78, the average life expectancy of an underprivileged person. That person, we're funding that person for 60 years, 50 to 60 years, depending on their lifespan. And then they're also learning from teaching and learning, their kids are learning from them, they're teaching their kids through the way they live in their environment, that their 4 children are going to see that same lifestyle and seeing a productive parent going to work every day and being able to sustain their own family, which creates confidence, which creates a lot of things. So, I was a very insecure child as growing up because I thought I wasn't worthy. I thought I was poor, which I was, but poor mentally. And until I started, doing things in business, which created my confidence, and then marrying a wonderful human being who really changed my life from a personal life.
I guess I still want to make sure I understand that we all understand, with your partnerships with these schools, that's $7,000 to $9,000. Where does that money come from?
It's coming from my wife and I personally right now. So my wife and I are funding it wholly to get the model into place. So we want to get the model built, show the performance. As you know, if most of you know Mr. Milken, everything's about analytics, and people could spin analytics. So we're building our own team at the Institute to measure the analytics to see what their performance is, not gaining off of somebody to try to spin something like a principal or a school system. So we will build our own analytics. George and I could say that, George, all right? I don't think any analytics that come out of a school system or the government is ever correct.
Yeah, George has some doubts about those numbers I just learned.
It's building an analytics program within Mike's group first, which it'll fall under Mike's group. My wife and I don't want to create the Seth and Marie Bernstein school systems. It's going to be under the Milken School. Mike's been an amazing mentor to me in life, and this is my way of giving back to Mike and giving back to these children. So it's $7,000 to $9,000 funding from us. Our goal is to prove this model out with these 3 schools, and then we'll start raising money, both mostly on the charitable side, but creating a public-private partnership. Because unlike businesses, the bigger and more powerful you get, charter schools, the bigger and more powerful you get, then you become unionized and everything goes away. Tony Resser's experiencing that here in LA with his schools.
Nick Dirks, president of, chancellor at UC Berkeley. You've had experience at Columbia as well, 2 very elite institutions. When we talk a lot about the graduation gap, a lot of people, part of this is just a question that there aren't really enough spots for students. So why don't places like Columbia and Berkeley get bigger? And there are certainly plenty of qualified students. We keep hearing about this undermatching problem in the country. Why not just get bigger?
Well, as you said, I was at Columbia for most of my academic administration career. I've taught a number of other places, but moved to Berkeley 2 years ago, in part because it is bigger, but even more so because Berkeley is an extraordinary institution in its capacity to marry excellence with access of a kind that we're talking about in the panel this morning. I was part of a whole group of people in the Ivy League who were trying to open up access You know, we have very good relations with Penn at Columbia, and we're very impressed by the extent to which we were able to raise our representation of underrepresented minorities and Pell Grant students and so on and so forth. I moved to Berkeley 2 years ago and realized that we at UC Berkeley alone have more Pell Grant students than in the entire Ivy League. We have more Pell Grant students at Berkeley than the entire student body at Stanford. So you're talking about a question of scale that already begins to indicate when you then think about, for example, the 9 undergraduate campuses of the University of California, is simply you know, step functions greater in terms of potential impact than some of the most elite private institutions, but with, again, the capacity to offer a very elite kind of education, and certainly access of a sort that is, you know, one end of the spectrum when we're talking about bridging the graduation gap. It's one thing to graduate from X university, it's another thing to graduate from Harvard, Penn, or Berkeley. So here, you know, we're talking about an elite education, but you know, the problem was that in 1960, when the master plan was set up in California, it was a kind of utopian scheme made real, and it seemed like we were going to be able to offer universal education in a state where merit could then get you to the finest universities in the world. And for a while, it seemed that California really was leading the way, and other systems, New York system, for example, of the State University of New York system was trying to find a way to replicate that. Only, of course, to come up against the growing divestment on the part of the states in public higher education. So, you know, between the 1940s and the 1960s, a whole set of new campuses were opened up, and then they stopped. In the late 1990s, a decision was made to open up the newest campus at the University of California at Merced, and that, of course, is still struggling because of the level of disinvestment on the part of the state. So would we like to get bigger? Of course. Would we like more campuses? Of course. But you know, 10 years ago, when my predecessor began as chancellor at UC Berkeley, 34% of the budget of the university came from the state. When I started 2 years ago, only 12% came from the state. So the issues of access and scale, as impressive as these statistics from Berkeley suggest, are now coming up against the limits, even when you have such a documented record of success, the limits of who's going to fund this.
As you may have noticed, Jamila Moore was unable to join us for this panel. She had a family emergency, and so I apologize for that. We would have had a stronger representation of the community college point of view here.
Before you go on, can you also, one thing I'm blown away by, what you've done, your graduation rates. The biggest, a lot
Right.
of students that go to these schools don't graduate. So the getting into school is not the thing, it's the graduation. Your graduation rate's incredible.
Well, thank you for mentioning that. I mean, that was another of these things that I encountered when I came to UC that was really extraordinary. We have, at Berkeley, in a 6-year period, a 91% graduation rate now, which is second only among public universities to the University of Virginia. But the University of Virginia has, I think, something like 12, 13, 14% Pell Grant students, right? So we have a case where Pell Grant students, if you take them as a subset, graduate in 6 years at an 87% rate. And this includes students from really, I mean, this includes students who have grown up in foster care. It includes undocumented students. We have now 400 undocumented students who are part of our undergraduate student body. So these things are impressive, but how do we fund this? And how do we continue to make available this kind of access? And again, just to go back to the community college point, the master plan mandated that 1/3 of the seats for undergraduates across the University of California be reserved for transfers from community colleges in California. We're not quite at 1/3. Berkeley is at actually 27%. Some of the other campuses around 30, 31%. So there still is this pathway, even through community colleges, even if that's obviously just one of several kinds of things that the community colleges are doing.
Are your students coming in from community colleges, are they the low-income students? Is it proportionate, or does it tend to be more of the upper middle-class kids from Silicon Valley who take 2 years at the community college and say, oh, now I'll transfer to Berkeley?
There are some of those, but 31% of our community college transfers are first-generation college students, and I think it's about close to 2 times the number of Pell Grant students proportionally.
Because Jamila Moore's not here, I wanted to throw up just the slide number 2, also because obviously where you go to college does matter, and as we talked a little bit earlier, race and income, unfortunately, in our country tend to equate together too often, and we talk about educational opportunities. There's a problem. This slide's a little hard to read, but it talks a little bit about who is getting the high impact practices at colleges. Are students getting exposed to internships? Are students getting exposed to undergraduate research opportunities? Are students getting exposed to something called the capstone experience, And these are practices that a lot of educators are now saying are really the thing that makes a difference in the college, that matters. And as you can see, there's a lot of racial disparity in the country right now about where students go and what they're getting exposed to. And I point out particularly the one on internships was the one that struck me the most. I imagine everybody in this room has an opportunity to provide internships or to network with their friends and help students get internships in college. They're a vitally important part of the college experience right now, particularly with the changes going on in our economy. And there's still kind of a divide racially for our country about who gets a lot of these good educational opportunities. I was going to go to John real quick. John Baker, you run Desire to Learn, a learning management platform company, and you're involved with some efforts now that I think are frankly pretty exciting too. I think I talked about them as a sea change when I was thinking about this. Data analytics, big data, and actually I guess in higher ed, it's not really big data. Sometimes it's just little data that does a lot. So how can the big data revolution make a difference in getting students, I guess actually through college, but as George was saying also, they're using it also at the K-12 level as well.
Yeah. So we work across all these sectors, so K-12, higher education, and now actually getting into workforce development, corporate. And maybe before I dive into that question, just to give you some context, so I grew up in a small fishing village, moved to a small, I guess, farming village. It wasn't even a village, it was a hamlet. Right? Canadian.
Yeah, Canadian.
And my parents sent 4 of us to university at the same time. So just to give you a framework. Low income combined with graduation rates was something that was particularly interesting for me for this panel. So I was thrilled to be invited and great to be on this panel with such great people. If I use data to sort of like bring up to sort of the macro level, so today, I don't know if you know, but it's only around 44% of people attain a post-secondary education in the US. Canada, it's 53. Russia's 53. Those are the top 2 in the world. And if you look at globally, what's the trajectory? Where's this going? What's the demand, if you will, for the workforce of the future? OECD puts its stats. So we're at 60% is what the attainment levels should be. And so that's a pretty big gap from where we are today and where we need to go into the future.
And for young people, it's not increasing as fast as it is in other countries.
You got it. It's basically the same. It's been flatlined for a little while, maybe increasing just slightly, but the trend is not there. So we actually crunched the data on. So the Obama administration's put out some goals of being able to hit the 60% number within the next 5. Some people say 10 years. And if you look at actually the current trends, we're going to be about 3.6 million short. So just to give you that's not an easy problem to solve. So it's about 700,000 extra students graduating a year. Huge issue. If you look at that first slide that you brought up, the 22 slide, the problem's not going to be solved by having more of the top quartile of students going through university or college. We've got to figure out how we handle this low income gap for getting these students through the educational experience. I think this is the most pressing concern that we probably have to address in education today. And did my mic fade out?
Just for a second, yeah.
Just for a second.
I'm sure someone might do.
Well, I think the big challenge now is how do we actually close this gap? Mm-hmm. And so, when I started D2L, it was the idea of being able to take these best ideas from education and scale it with technology. I looked at it as really the only lever that could help us move the needle faster, if you will, to really be able to drive the results.
Tell people a little bit what I think some of you may have been reading some of this stuff about the way that colleges are keeping track of students in their classes and how they are proceeding through their educational process, but can you give us just like a 2-second, like a 2-minute explanation of how that works?
So in terms of what we do is online.
Not just you, but but not just a commercial for his company. This is broadly.
I think one of the interesting things is learning analytics. So it's the concept of being able to look at the data and be able to do things like predict outcomes and intervene early to get students on the right track. So there's really 3 big things that we're zeroing in on to sort of like help solve some of this challenge. One's giving students the right advice. So if you're a first-generation student, you've never been to university, you probably only have, on average, a few minutes in a semester to get advice from a guidance counselor. That's the average. Most people don't take advantage of that. And when you think about it, when you're selecting courses, there's this huge gap. So Pell Grant recipients tend to be about 20% less likely to complete a course.
I'm going to stop you. Does anyone know that Pell Grant is the program for low-income students? I just want to make sure. And half the students in the country are on Pell Grants. So this is not a small problem.
And so simply just giving them the advice on which course they're going to be likely to succeed in and which ones they're not going to succeed in, it has a huge difference in closing that gap. And then when they actually get into the courses, where learning analytics tends to
how do you give them the advice, or how do they know if they're going to succeed or not? How does this work?
So when right at the point of registration, so 5 stars, you're going to succeed in this course. Perfect for your degree program. Way to go.
Based on the experiences of
millions of others that have gone through before them.
So you kind of collected all this data of different experiences.
So in our case, we work with about 15 to 17 million students across the U.S. And we've been building this data model for the last 16 years. So the idea is just like Amazon can just say, hey, you're interested in buying this. Here's something else that you're interested in. We can do that now when it comes to like helping students pick courses. So better than 92% accurate now, telling a student if they're going to fail or if they're going to get an A, B, or C.
Students who took Math 102 were much more likely to do well in Math 202.
Well, we get it right down to the individual. So here's what we would recommend that you take based upon millions of others that fit a similar profile, if that makes sense. And then when you get into the course, the next big wave of learning analytics is around what we call adaptive learning. And this is a complex technology, but basically what it does is if you're struggling with something, it'll automatically recommend other learning activities and then continue to assess you to get you back on track. And I think this is the piece that enables those first-generation students to really close that gap. Because what it's doing is typically you're just passing them on. So you're passing on the problem from K-12 into higher ed, and then you've got to deal with this remediation issue. But with adaptive learning, what you can do is you can quickly assess how the students are doing, and then you can get them back on track if they're lacking in certain areas with other activities. And you personalize education in real time. You don't wait for them to fail the midterm. You don't wait for them to fail the final exam to go spend time with the student. You have to do it real time.
So do you have a sense, and I don't know, maybe you don't, but I don't imagine they're doing this yet that much at Berkeley.
No, this is new. This is,
right. But it is
there's only a few dozen probably colleges across the U.S. doing this.
But the use of data analytics is growing somewhat at colleges. You mentioned earlier, George, that there's a lot of resistance sometimes that schools don't want to be tracking students, right?
Not on the college level. The colleges are very, very accurate. My issue, and I think Seth alluded to it, the problem in inner city schools is the data is totally inaccurate, and it's not even close to the truth. And the worst parts of inner city, 24 to 28% of 9th graders graduate high school. Okay, yesterday Lowell asked me to partake in a luncheon discussion on K through 12, and the former mayor of LA was there, and he talked about, and he was known as an educational mayor, and he said they had to take over 22 schools that were failing in Watts, and he said we got the graduation rates up to 70%. Okay, now he took off right after that, so there was no chance to question it. Okay, but what's interesting is it probably is an accurate statement, but from what is the baseline? Okay, if it's a failing school and 80% of your kids already went to the street, then you're looking at seniors that graduated high school. Okay, and so it may be an accurate number. So I have a big issue at any of these panels that if you don't get the right data, and I'll give you 2 examples of this. In Syracuse, New York, and we have taken over 2 cities. We're taking over 2 more cities in the fall, and we'll have 165,000 kids. So we took over the city of Syracuse 8 years ago, and after the first year, they asked me to speak at 2 of the graduations. So I took the 2 poorest schools, and there were 1,500 kids among the 5 schools. And I asked the superintendent who was sitting next to me how many of the kids took Say Yes scholarships, these free tuition scholarships. The answer was 950. Months later, I heard a number in the 7s. Finally, we hired a superintendent that came out of Eli Broad's academy and dug through the numbers. The number was 506. Okay, why aren't people speaking the truth? Former Chancellor Klein in New York told me that every convicted felon that goes to Rikers Island is not a dropout in the New York school data. It's a transfer because they have a small high school that nobody goes to at Rikers Island. So if you don't have accurate data, how do you compare? When we talk and you see these different charts, that if you get these kids educated and how many, trillions of dollars, I think Lowell used the term $40 trillion that could be added to the economy. But if you don't have accurate data, it is very hard. And the question is, I'll end with this statement, is I had a wonderful lunch with a former Cardinal Egan. And he said to me, George, why don't you tell the truth about New York and what's happening? And the answer is very simple. I have 400 kids in Harlem that the teachers are allowing their teachers to teach, after school to my kids. The Teamsters are keeping my schools open 4 hours after they're supposed to be closed. And if you tell the truth, they'll shut down the services to my kids. But if the truth comes out, and I think the Bloomberg administration did some wonderful things, but if the truth came out in New York City, the teachers union would be embarrassed, the administration would be embarrassed. So it behooves nobody to come out and tell the truth. Occasionally, you will see a superintendent, like a superintendent of Hartford, came out with a statement that 24%, it was either 24 or 28% of entering freshmen in the Hartford school system graduate high school. Okay, now that didn't go over well, but it happens to be the truth, and the truth sometimes hurts.
I thought when you were talking about tracking earlier, I thought you were talking about something differently. I thought you were talking about people are reluctant to put students in tracks and to sort of, tell somebody at an early age that they're going to be, you're going to vocational education, you're going to the college track. And
no,
there was
no, that's not what I was referring to.
Because that's what I worry about a little bit with the tracking at the college level, because it feels at some level fascinating that they can use this technology to advance all the, to tell you where you should be, who's going to do well in the class, but it feels somewhat paternalistic to me as well, because they're not doing it yet at Berkeley. They're not going to do it at Williams. They're not going to do it probably at a lot of the schools that people in this room are in.
Can I interject one thing, because this is, Mike always tells me to be a little controversial in these committees. Okay, when you look at student monitoring, okay, which is so elemental that every suburban school district has, in the inner cities they do not have student monitoring systems. Okay,
what do you mean by a student monitoring
literally,
system?
how is the kid doing academically? What are the social issues? What are the health issues? Okay, and they don't have it. We go into a city now, we demand that they put in our student monitoring system so you can track. Syracuse to this day, okay, does not have a student monitoring system. Why? Because then you can track how kids have done. What is the real success rate? So you can knock out the bullshit and really help your kids. So forgive me for getting back at this, but this is really a serious issue that if we don't address it, we're comparing apples to oranges.
And giving access to the parents. So the access to platforms, and it's not just for underprivileged, it's for all kids, for all children. And you're right. They don't want to give the accurate data. They don't want the unfiltered data. They want to take it and filter it. I think that's one of the biggest issues, is you're not getting actual data from the children. Are you happy? Are you going through issues? You would get ahead of issues, from mental issues. Mental issues can cause a lot of problems in schools. And one of the biggest things I do, my children go to public education, and you look at self-confidence. So if my daughter's sitting next to somebody who is, can't eat and is not going to go through the weekend, we found out in our school, the subsidized lunch programs, 78% of those kids were not eating over the weekend. So they would not eat a meal from the time they left school Friday afternoon to the time they got to school Monday morning. So what we did is, the privileged family, and this is what I think is lacking in our country. So if you look back 65, 70 years ago, before federal government took over the school systems, it was community oriented. And what I love what George is doing, he's going right to the city. We talked about this 2 days ago. is, when you go into the city takes control of it, and the city gets behind it. If you look, 60, 70 years ago with everything, everything that goes closer to the county, you get closer to it. If somebody had a problem financially, they'd go to the local guy who owned the hardware store and get a loan. They wouldn't go to the federal government for, unemployment or whatever it might be. So same thing with education. If we could get to the point where, you're helping feed these children locally, you're helping support these children locally, you're helping tutor these kids, they're giving access to these underprivileged kids. So one of the programs I looked at yesterday that Mike's just invested in, we were talking about this afternoon, is taking a system where you can help sponsor online, sponsor a student. So I could sponsor a student for a tutor, so he can get set up with that tutor. It becomes like a Facebook meets Twitter meets, an underprivileged children. So you could actually sponsor a child to get tutored online. I'm
reminded of these ads that we used to see, on these TV commercials about sponsoring children overseas.
Yeah. Well, why don't we do it in our own counties? That's the idea. It's taking back to the county, taking care of your own in your own county.
I think another way to tackle the challenge is to think about how do you actually give the data to the student, to the parents, and to the teachers. A great example. So Deakin University, this professor down there, Jackie Broadbent, teaches a class. When I first met her, she had 1,200 students in her class, and completion rates were around 60%.
What, 1,200 students in one class?
Yeah, one class. Intro to health behavior.
Big lecture class.
Big classroom, and completion rates around 60%. 74% student satisfaction. Now she has 2,100 students. I think she's approaching 2,300 though this year, and so almost doubled. Completions have gone up to 90%, and she now has a 4.7 out of 5 on student satisfaction. And so just stunning results. And I asked like simple questions like, so why? Like that's a complete transformation. Like huge enrollment growths to address the access. But also at the same time increasing the quality. That seems like a tough one to solve. And what she's done is she just continues to research what's working, what's not working. So she's got like 27 different strategies on how to personalize learning. If a student goes from getting a 50 to a 60, they get like a little personalized email from her with a picture of her cat saying, "Way to go!" And the student's like, "I got a 60 on that assignment. I was not expecting, to get a personal email." Meanwhile, it's all automated behind the scenes.
I'm seeing some of these systems. They call them the attaboy. You get an attaboy button, or you get a go see your counselor button, depending on what you've been doing, right?
But then you also have to think about when you design these systems, how do you actually give back time to the teacher? Because I've visited probably about 2,000 teachers over the last year, and looking for that mythical I don't care about my kid's teacher, because people tell me that these exist out there, and I haven't seen them. And what I hear though is I don't have time to be able to sort through all this noise to figure out what I should be doing to be more effective in my classroom or more effective online. And so giving the data to those people to help them make the decisions, but also then define technology to actually make them more productive. And my favorite for her was leaving a voice feedback on assignments. And you think, the student goes, "Wow, you took the time to leave me a voice feedback on how I did on this essay." And meanwhile, she's like, "It takes me 43% less time to leave you audio feedback than it does to write it." So, saving time increases quality. And so the more that we can share some of these promising best practices, and the more that we can give the data to the student and to the faculty, I think that's where we're going to see a real big change.
Can I just, I think that, it's absolutely right that these kinds of personalized techniques are going to make a huge difference, particularly when you begin to think about how these debates between, residential and online experiences actually miss the point. You can do both, and you actually must do both. But I want to go back to some of the issues around outreach into schools, from high schools right down. Because one of, I was talking before about the problem of state funding for the University of California as such, but until about 6 years ago, our campus alone had available for different kinds of programs close to $3 million for outreach into schools. And this included the Puente program, which is a wonderful program across the state of California that establishes mentors in schools, does some of the kinds of things that we're hearing about here. And of course, it does pick up on students who have the wherewithal and the academic record to promise that they might be able to get into a four-year college. But nevertheless are encountering huge kinds of obstacles and disincentives in their everyday life, from food to just, a cohort that could actually say, yes, we expect we're going to go to college. The mentors get embedded in schools. They work with the students. They begin with the presupposition, not whether you're going to go to college, but yes, we're going to go to college. Which one are we going to go to? But again, these programs have been massively cut. There's not a single Point A program left in the Central Valley. And other programs, including opportunities to fund students from Berkeley and other UC campuses to serve as interns and mentors in schools in Richmond and Oakland and other neighborhood schools where there are hugely challenging socioeconomic and other situations, have been radically cut. So, just the backdrop on this is that one of the reasons that we need to find new solutions is that some of the older solutions simply aren't getting the level of state funding that they used to get before.
I came into this room preparing for this thinking that we're going to be talking about college,
Yeah.
but really we're not talking. We're not talking about college that much, and I think we're right to not be talking about college because we really have to be talking about before college. But the college connection has to be made, and George and some of the others. I mean, what's missing right now? And I mean, if the states are not going to fund these kinds of programs, but yet there is interest at school levels and city levels to have these kinds of programs, how do you make the better connections back into the colleges?
I think I'm going to take a step back because we keep talking about what the government's not doing, what the teacher's not doing. Growing up in the environment, the only one who grew up in the environment, the key is, if you're a 6-year-old child and you're growing up in Harlem, New York, you're not thinking about going to college. You're not thinking about, I want to go to college. You're not thinking about, your idols are basketball players and athletes and entertainers. Your role model is not Bob Johnson. When I speak to students about 3 to 4 times a month. I always ask the question, do you know who Bob Johnson is? They have no idea who Bob Johnson is. I said, you know who BET is? Yeah. Well, I said, well, Bob Johnson pays Michael Jordan when he played for the Bobcats. So, the key is, I think there's got to be the technology of getting them to break down what are their goals, what do they want to do in life. So at 6, 7 years old, do you want to have a home? Yeah. Do you want to have what's your favorite car? BMW. Do you want to have a BMW? Okay, setting a goal and then helping them back into that goal.
Give them a map.
Giving a map of how do they get there. Here's how you can make $60,000 a year. You don't have to make $10 million a year. How do you make $60,000 a year? And if you go to these 10 schools, you'll make $60,000 a year. Here's how you get into these schools from 6 on, teaching that bridges the gap of what's important.
You're on, but you're not, because the real competition is the drugs in the inner city. And making those kind of monies, is very viable for them. Yeah. But I do agree with you when you can raise their expectations. And one of the great motivators is, do you want to get your mother out of the hood? Okay, that motivates them mainly, probably more so than a car, but literally to give them a better lifestyle. But Goldie, you talked about an interesting part of the discussion is about the gap, getting kids to college, okay? And I could care less, frankly, about the number of kids and the percentages that are matriculating in college. What I'm concerned is making sure that they graduate. When you look at, I go to all the Penn graduations, and slowly you start seeing, men of color walking down the aisle. Okay, that is really a key thing for the future of our country, and so I think it's a two-sided question. We have to do more. The answers, when we look at it and we've discussed, and it's a very, very difficult problem to change. Okay, with the federal government, without the federal government, trying to turn this huge battleship in a small pond of changing inner city kids and the school systems, it is a mighty difficult task. Does Say Yes work? Can Say Yes be replicated? Absolutely.
How do you know that Say Yes works, by the way? What do you measure, and how do you, what are the things we should be looking at to judge the program well?
The problem is making sure you have the accurate data.
Okay. Let's assume you have the best data. Okay. You have the data.
Michael will like our data.
Okay.
When you look at the city of Syracuse, 89.5% of our kids stayed at the colleges that they were the year before. Now, why is this? These 70 colleges sign a compact with us that they will mentor and monitor our kids.
And do they pay they pay financial aid too?
They pay 99.9% of our kids get free tuition at these schools. That's obviously, a very, very strong, incentive. When you look, you can obviously look at our high school graduation rates. You could look at one piece of data that is very, very important, the fact that we changed the hours that social workers work. They work from 10 to 3, okay? And they never would have caught Seth from 10 to 3, Monday through Friday, right? Where you got in all your trouble was, in the weekends or, later on at night. So by looking at flexible hours, Onondaga County, which is beyond the city of Syracuse, okay, foster placements went down 41% because the social workers were intervening in the families. So I do know that the data isn't perfect. One of the flaws that you have when you take on a city, yes, home values go up, people move into the city, and who wouldn't you move? You go to the airport in Syracuse, they say move to Syracuse, your kid will get free tuition, and they mention all these colleges. That's a great incentive, so it does help the city. What is really hard is change the academics. Okay, when we did our first models, we took a one-off school. We could change the curriculum. It's much harder to change a entire school district.
Yeah, I'm struck actually today in Washington, while we've been here in California, there was a big announcement out of the White House today that they were going to, there was a group through the My Brother's Keeper initiative, they were going to add, I think, 100,000 new slots for students to take AP classes and international baccalaureate classes for students. But I think that's a very small drop in the bucket of what's out there. A lot of students are still at high schools that don't have anywhere near the class.
It's a great start. The difficulty is that you have, when President Reagan cut back on the scholarships way back, the number of kids that just drop off the cliff. Millions of kids a year that have an opportunity set. But one thing I'll throw out here that I've been kicking around that I'm going to bring back to my SAYS board, the data that you look at, and I'm sure you look at it at Berkeley, is when you have juniors in college, okay, that drop out not for academic reasons, for financial aid reasons. Now, Berkeley will have the funding to make sure that these kids don't drop out. But some of those schools that don't have the endowment, they drop out and they never come back. Okay, these kids have been motivated to go through they're in academic standards, so they're posed to graduate. And that's a travesty, okay, that people like Seth, myself, and others, philanthropists, can put you're talking $500 or $1,000 or $2,000, okay, for a kid to be productive.
There's Georgia State University, and I think probably several others have recently just found this. They've actually been using data to target, and they go back and they look who's about to drop out, and then they go back and they check with the bursar, and it's really it is $500 or less, and they give them these micro scholarships to keep them through.
When you look at it, that's the easiest solution that we can come up with. Okay, just raise $20 million and you'll stop the problem.
It is about money ultimately.
I think that's one part of the problem, but I think we've got to break it down into like these bigger buckets. If we think we're not graduating enough students, and I would argue that the top elite students they're going to make it through. Right? Now, if we can make that educational experience even more special,
if they have the money to pay for their college.
Yes, I agree. But it's this middle group that's really struggling. So I break it down into how do we help them make the right choices? How do we help with the schools or the universities figuring out how to do the right interventions? But also, how do we enable the students when they're struggling with material that they've never been in front of before? How do we help them get back on track? And because otherwise, what you're doing is you're just compounding the problem. Every year that they survive, they just sneak by from one semester to the next. It leaves them further behind than their classmates. And so, being able to tackle these things independently is I think part of the solution. You've got to step back and go, well, how do we come up with solutions for this, and for this?
Well, to George's point, though, 83%, I was one of them. 83% of the kids that are not graduating college is not because they're falling behind school-wise, it's because they don't have the money.
Yeah.
And so this is where I've spent a lot of my time. I mean,
Not mutually exclusive.
no. But if you don't have the money, you can't where you can't
dead.
even fall behind in school.
That's
You're
right.
done. You're
No,
out.
it's-
I mean, that was
And
me.
we're talking about students at at state universities, not necessarily at,
No.
at fancy private schools.
Yeah, I was at UConn. I went to state school, and I had great grades, and I had great, because of playing sports, I had great academic tutors and everything. Wonderful people around me,
I think you had more than
helping me.
that.
I got a lot more access. My Huskies were helping me, but I didn't have the money, so I had to quit college after 2 years when my father passed away, because I didn't have the money, and I had to go support myself, just to live, just to eat, just to have an apartment. So I would have loved to be able to graduate college. I didn't have the opportunities yet.
You know, one thing.
I also want to go ahead and then
Can I
I'm
just-
going to say if there's a question or two from the audience. We definitely have time to talk about,
I
take
just
some
want to
questions.
add to this. I mean, the problem that's been identified here is a real one that you find over and again, but you find it, of course, with the students coming from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, where, for example, even financial aid is often used to pay your mother's rent. Because you get a package of money and you have you feel you have an obligation to use that money for the
especially in the Pell
especially in the
Grants.
Pell Grants. So you have students who fall behind because they can't register, and you know we have the resources and the capacity in our university to identify those students and advance them loans and try to get them re-registered and back on track. But it costs money, and of course the question of cost and financial aid you alluded to. Some of the great universities in the country do offer wonderful financial aid packages. So the sticker price, in fact, doesn't affect students coming from families, sometimes making up to $200,000. But there are a lot of universities where, of course, those cost factors do provide real barriers to access. And even when they don't, students, of course, hear about the cost of higher education. They'll look and they'll see the sticker price. And this, again, is where really getting information in real, usable, compelling ways into schools for kids who are thinking about the possibility of doing something after high school if they're going to graduate is so critical, because, of course, there are all kinds of resources typically they don't even think about.
I have to say the news media is part of that. I just saw this cool chart where someone did a report about the reports in the press about what student debt is compared to the actual numbers, and the press reports are generally overestimate the debt. That level's a lot. There's a question in the back. Let's let someone have it.
Hi, good morning. So as far as getting kids to appreciate going to college, a lot of the kids in the ghettos or low income, not only are they unable to even dream the concept of going to college, but they have no mentorship, right? They lack the family foundation and so forth. Somebody that basically gives a shit about them. Now, in the military, I do a lot of mentoring with sailors who deploy around the world over Skype, email, text, and weekly. I constantly keep them in check to the point where they're afraid to disappoint me because they'll disappoint themselves. Now, I believe information technology and cyberspace, cyber mentoring might be an aspect where somebody of affluence could mentor someone in the ghetto. Perhaps that's something we could do.
Do you do that through some kind of a formal program, or
No,
just
it's not
because you're a
formal.
good guy?
This is just me and my fellow officers.
How do you connect to the students?
Well, you have to create something what we call emotional leverage, right? Once you build that bond, then you could kind of yank on that leverage a little bit and say, hey, I'm going to push you to grow, right? Because you truly believe that I am sincerely believing in you, and that you sincerely believe that you could achieve what you want
And
to
then
do.
literally, how did you find these students? I mean, what was how did you're not just dialing them up one day, right? How do you?
Right. No. Well, typically they're either assigned to us through some type of program, or you just run into them in the hallways and you say, hey, you know what? I see something. You could feel that connection. So
Like you made a connection to a high school or something before?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So we need a lot more of this sort of informal mentoring in formal and informal mentoring. I think there's a question.
Well, can I answer one question on mentoring? The key to mentoring is the consistency of the mentoring, especially when there's a single parent family. They see males coming in and out of their life. So somebody mentoring somebody for a year, 2 years, and then leaving them sets these kids right back. So it's a consistency of that mentoring, because mentoring works as long as it's consistent.
Go ahead.
So I have a couple of comments and a question. This is
If you could just do a question, just because we want to keep it moving.
okay. So one of the things that I have not heard mentioned is the role of teachers, the instructors. We've talked about technology, but not teachers. And I guess I come from this given context. My parents were teachers. I'm in healthcare, and I think that it's very important that a solution, in part, be integrated, where we're looking at the needs of the kids, the teachers, and the parents, and rolling that out. I'm familiar with Berkeley has some excellent programs, but I'm also concerned about how do we get teachers, you know, the scandal that occurred in Atlanta with the teachers feeling that pressure. I grew up in Chicago, and I went to Chicago public schools. I went to Inglewood High School, which is the area now that's bombed out, and I currently live in Baltimore, so I'm familiar with that. But I am in healthcare, and, well, actually I'm an emergency physician, so, and I just happened here, but I registered when I found out about the conference. But I think it's important. I think there's a role for healthcare providers to integrate that as a part of the solution. I also think, my mother was a learning disability specialist. I think there's a learning specialist model that would be helpful in educational systems in public schools, because they have improvement programs that are a part of the curriculum. So if you were to integrate in it, so in final comment, and I wonder if this exists, but if you were to integrate into a school improvement plan a way to capture what the concerns of a community were, so it's not just low income, it's for everyone, then you could, on a regular basis, talking about data, it would already incorporate it into some type of improvement process. Final thing is the concept of how do you select kids from the inner city. Other people have spoken about it, and know their readiness, their awareness. You know, I think it's in addition to mentorship, they have no dreams. When you see a kid in the emergency room and the kid is standing there with their parent, their grandmother has high blood pressure, and no one looks at the kid. They don't talk to the kid. There's no interaction, and that's not an excuse for what's going on in Baltimore. But I think that there is a need to think about how you can leverage some of those points of contact.
So George, your program has a lot of holistic approaches and does that, but it sounds like it's an overlay to the school, but it's not what this woman mentioned. It's not part of the school improvement plan. It's kind of, you know, in the end of the day, the teachers don't get paid based on the success rates of the SAYS kids, right?
That's correct. We handle the mental health and the health, you know, components of that, and you are right, okay, but it's hard for somebody to come in and talk about, you know, you're really trying to change the home, the expectations of the home, the culture, and the backgrounds, and so I do agree. And it's, you know, the teachers are obviously a very important component, but it is hard to tie in and change everything. Okay, what you really just try to do is fix the things that you can fix. You know, one thing that, you know, that was sort of mentioned here is parents. And, you know, most of our kids are, you know, come from a single parent home. And everybody talks about participation in PTA meetings. And the solution to that is simple. It's like those juniors in colleges dropping out. Our history was that we were never getting these parents to come out for PTA meetings. And when you look at the problem, the answer was very simple. We moved our PTA meetings to churches, and our participation went way up. And the question is why? Because most of our single mothers dropped out of school, and they settle in the same neighborhoods. And that grammar school, middle school, whatever they dropped out of, represents blame, shame, failure. They're afraid to go back to that school. Moving it to a church and supplying a meal, suddenly the parents are active, and everybody says as the parents don't care. The parents care, the mothers care, but give them a place that they feel safe.
What time do you have the meeting? Because I'm imagining these are working people.
You obviously have to do it, you know, early evening dinner, you know, time.
I think there's a question up front. Just yell it out louder.
Oh, sorry. Rightly or wrongly, there seems to be increased skepticism about the need for every child to go to a four-year college. And in fact, yesterday, there have been a number of people commenting on the value of vocational training. It used to be called, but skills-based training is what they're calling it now. In fact, Carmen Farina in the New York City public school system has embraced this as something that, because kids need to be able to earn a living. And to the earlier conversation, this is something that seems to me to be worthy, at least as a conversation here. As you say, you haven't really focused on colleges exclusively, but this is like, the governor of North Carolina said yesterday that the average age of electricians in North Carolina is 58 years old. The average age of farmers, 60 years old. These people are going to be retiring. Those jobs need to be taken. They don't need a four-year degree.
Absolutely. We don't. I hope everyone heard that. Talking about the difference. That everyone doesn't need a 4-year degree. That sign says something, but I can't see what it says.
Although
It says session over. So this is going to be it.
I can tell you, farmers and electricians need a 4-year degree today to operate farms. Trust me.
But you know what? Coders and developers don't, and Google's hiring a lot of kids right out of high school, and I think we should be focused on today's technology. You don't need a 4-year degree. It's a point, but there's kids that need to go to schools and the universities. There's also kids that don't. And if you get them focused on a dream and a passion, and with a mentor, as George pointed out, I think that'll get them to one of those two places.
And I think we also have to say that you may have some post-secondary education right after high school, but you may want to go back in the future. So think about. I mean, I think we need to think about these things as stackable kinds of credentials that can go along the way.
At Berkeley, we're working now with AT&T, and the fact that their workforce is not going to be climbing poles in the future. They're going to be programming and doing other things. And so, of course, part of the concern with a vocational model is that you track kids too early. Another one of the concerns with the vocational model is that you teach them for a career that will disappear. So we have to build into that.
That's also true with college graduates.
Well, no, not
a lot of these careers are disappearing.
But the skills that the college graduates have aren't necessarily disappearing.
The skills are transferable.
Anyway, we would love to take this conversation on for another hour. Well, a lot of you have to go to lunch, as we do. Thank you. Please join me in
Thank you all.
thanking this wonderful panel.